Yes. Hi, people from the streaming that was waiting for us. Hi, everyone. Welcome to these little but super intensive and tasty creative mornings. Our October theme is endurance. Maybe, if it goes okay. And I wanted to read a little text about by Alain de Botton. A healthy mind knows how to hope. It identifies and then hands on tenaciously to a few reasons to keep going. Grounds for despair, anger, and sadness are, of course, all around, but the healthy mind knows how to bracket negativity in the name of endurance. It clings to evidence of what is still good and kind. It remembers to appreciate. Our October theme has been chosen by Team Soara community and illustrated by Anna Kuhn. We can endure pain. That's the news of the world. But that's not the core for this concept, because endurance is the resistance that allows you to take your ideas, to take your vague concept, to get you to the end of the marathon, to get you to the end of your project, and feeding your hopes and turning them into dreams, and turning dreams into project. So endurance is the substance of hope, and in this moment, I think we need to give a lot of nutrition, a lot of food to our hope. So I welcome Matteo Spini, expert and researcher on climate justice. But before, space is in the right, it's not in the right slide, but before I want to thank Matteo, who is here, who's bringing us breakfast today, and who's bringing breakfast and food to a lot of people who's working on their project, their dreams, and their hopes, I think. I don't know if you want to introduce something, or we can go on. If you want, you have to come here, because the only webcam is here.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. So we are a startup born in 2021. We arrived in Milan a few months later, and the concept of Matteo is to make a revolution in delivery. So the concept is you don't order anymore. So you give us, you give up the choice, you rely on us. We have experts on our teams, AI and algorithms that make the right choice for you. So at lunchtime, you don't really have the time to scroll through the apps like you do whenever you are on your couch at nighttime in front of Netflix. So you need to be quick, you need to be smart, and you need to eat well. So Matteo is the right choice, because you don't need to waste your time choosing. Just let us do the work and enjoy your meal. And the second thing is you can be sure about the time of the delivery. You don't have to wait. You're not subject to the traffic of the day. You'll be sure that in 15 minutes time, you'll have your lunch in your desk. So that's it. Give it a try. I gave you some discounts and some free tries, and we hope to see you at lunchtime as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So people here are enjoying the breakfast offered by Matteo, but you can find the link to their website also on our social networks and enjoy them too. Next, of course, thank you again to Spaces, who's hosting us also for this edition in Spaces Vetra. We share values with them, we share a lot of ideas, and we are super happy to go on with this collaboration. Finally, thank you to our beautiful team. Without this team, Creative Mornings couldn't exist. Thank you to the people who are here today, to ones who couldn't make it and who are looking at us from the streaming session, or that were rooting for us from behind the scenes. Next one, of course, if someone wants to join us, you're super welcome. Everyone is welcome, but especially today, our speaker. So just let me switch everything. Sempre che il mouse torni da questa parte. Ok. Okay. Let's see if I can do the magic again. No, perfetto. Lais, you are there on the streaming. We miss you.
Stanno vedendo la tua faccia super
Sì.
un primissimo piano.
Ok.
Eccoci. Yes.
Okay, so please.
Thank you. Okay. Like this. Thank you very much, Creative Mornings, Mamt and Spaces, and all of you for inviting me and coming here. So this is my presentation. I'm a sociologist and climate activist, and today I want to discuss with you about this topic. This idea of climate resistance that is increasingly used by climate justice movements. And so this is the outline of today's presentation, more or less in 20 minutes. A brief introduction about the climate crisis we are living in, why we are failing to mitigate the climate crisis, what is the concept of climate justice, that is very popular, but sometimes it's not really clear what it means. What is the eco-social transition? A brief discussion about climate justice movements, and finally some ideas to relaunch activism. So just a quick mention to the climate crisis. I mean, we don't have time to get into the details, and I assume that more or less we are all aware of the situation that we are living. So basically, despite the Paris Agreement, the global emissions of greenhouse gases continue rising. The last year, they grew by almost 1% compared to the previous year. And so basically, this has a lot of consequences. The climate crisis is, first of all, a violation of basic human rights, from the right to health, to life, to education, and protection from violence. It contributes to conflicts, to mass migrations, poverty, inequalities, and also the so-called sixth mass extinction, which is the first mass extinction caused by humanity, let's say. So we have to recognize that in this scenario, the dominant approaches applied by government have failed so far. And so I believe we need to correct the course, and I believe we still have time to correct the course. So first of all, this is my reading. Why this failure? Why are we failing to cut greenhouse gas emissions? Well, we could identify several factors. For me, there are 5 main factors. First of all, there's still this myth that the market alone can solve our ecological problems. So there's this idea of an invisible green hand, which for me is invisible because it doesn't exist. This does not mean that we need to, let's say, abolish the market, but we have to recognize that the approaches based on free markets so far have failed. Then there's another myth for me, which is the myth of growth and the myth of green growth. So the discussion is a bit complex, but first of all, I would say that There are several studies demonstrating that we do not need growth in order to guarantee the well-being of people. For instance, public services and redistribution of wealth are enough to guarantee the well-being of people. And the issue of green growth is very complex, but the current studies are demonstrating that the decoupling between growth and greenhouse emissions is happening, but too slowly. So the idea of green growth is that we can continue growing our economy and at the same time cutting greenhouse gas emissions. The problem is that this is not happening as fast as to guarantee a safe climate for everybody. But still, this is a very popular idea in the European Union and in government. Third, of course, the pervasive political, cultural influence of the big oil industry and agribusiness. If you look at the climate conference of parties, for instance, the first delegation is constituted by big oil lobbyists. Fourth, we have several psychological factors that in many cases are due to a wrong communication. And these psychological factors somehow inhibit the change that we need. For instance, so far the communication is very much about the climate crisis, is very much based on fear and doomism, if you look at newspapers, but also if you look at some climate movements. But the fact is that science demonstrates that this kind of communication produces denial, apathy, and resignation. So we really need to change the kind of the way we communicate the climate crisis and its solutions. And then there's another myth for me, which is the myth of the green consumer. So, of course, we all need to change our behaviors. But again, there are several studies that demonstrate that the individual behavioral change is not enough. So we need precise public policies to ensure a sustainable future. So, for instance, there's a study which is mentioned also at the end of the presentation, which demonstrates that there are 6 key lifestyle changes that are very important to cut global emissions of greenhouse gases. These lifestyle changes can cut this emission by 25-27%, which is an important percentage, but it's not enough. Okay. So these lifestyle changes are, first of all, less clothes, buying less clothes or buying second-use clothes, less meat, less dairy products, cutting flights, reducing the use of cars and the ownership of cars. Fifth, materials efficiency and building utilization. And 6, the optimization of the lifetime of IT equipment, laptops, smartphones, and so on, which have a relevant environmental impact. So these lifestyle changes are important, but they are not enough. So this somehow is a myth that a shift to a green consumerist approach is enough to solve the problem. And also this obsession with green consumerism somehow hides the issue of inequality. So, for instance, the richest 10% is responsible for 50% of the emissions. So it's there where we should focus our priorities in cutting the emissions of the richest 10%, for instance. And then also there are 100 companies in the world who are responsible for 71% of the greenhouse emissions. So it's also there where we should focus the attention and not applying this, let's say, generalized green consumerist approach or green consumer approach. So again, behavioral change, individual behavioral change is important, but it's not enough. For me, in order to address the climate crisis, we need to apply a climate justice approach, which is a very broad concept. And at the end, it means three things. First of all, it means focusing on the real responsibilities for the climate crisis and the other ecological crisis, which this, of course, is also an ideological position. The colonial capitalist system, we could agree or not, but at least we could discuss about the Industrial Revolution and its contribution in terms of emissions. This, of course, is based on science. The global north is the main responsible for the emissions. So the USA, Europe, big oil, agribusiness, and the polluting elite. Also, we have evidence about the responsibility in terms of emissions. So the climate justice approach says, first of all, let's focus on the real responsibilities, because there is this very popular term, the Anthropocene, which suggests that humanity is responsible for the climate crisis. According to me, this is a very false statement and concept, because this is an issue of unequal responsibilities. We couldn't say that, for instance, African farmers are responsible for the climate crisis. Their emissions are extremely low. And then the climate justice approach suggests to look at the consequences of the climate crisis in terms of equalities and inequalities. So first of all, the most vulnerable individuals, meaning children, poor people, farmers, women in many cases, indigenous people, are the most affected by climate disasters, despite their marginal responsibility in emitting greenhouse gas emissions, in emitting greenhouse gases. And third, the climate justice approach suggests to focus on a just transition, which is an ecological and social transition to a new kind of society, which should be seen as an opportunity of redistribution of wealth, democratization, and system change. And now we're gonna focus on this aspect, the eco-social transition. So again, this is my view. It can be criticized or not. We could agree or not. But I think that we cannot rely only on individuals or only on market-based solution or technology to change the system in where we live and to solve the climate crisis, or to mitigate. It's better to say to mitigate the climate crisis, because we cannot really totally solve it. And this eco-social transition can be achieved through eco-social policies. So public policies that conjugate sustainability and justice, okay? And if we only promote a transition based on sustainability, but we forget the dimension of justice, we could provoke social unrest and social resistance from the people who are most affected by this transition. So some example of eco-social policies that could conjugate sustainability and justice. For instance, the taxation of rich people, who are the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases, and the taxation of polluting products, the downsizing of polluting sectors, such as agribusiness, for instance, or fast fashion, public transport, compensations for the working class. This means that, of course, some sectors will have to downsize radically. So we need some compensation for the workers of those sectors in order to have a just transition. Severe limitation of advertising. This is also a controversial proposal, I understand, but we need to understand how advertising also produces false desires, and these desires lead to unsustainable behaviors. And of course, incentives maybe to renewable energies, thermal insulation, and sustainable economic activities. So the idea is that we need public policies, again, to conjugate sustainability and social justice. And then let's go to climate movements. So let's introduce this topic with Greta Thunberg, that the Swedish climate activist, that 2 years ago in Milan, she affirmed that hope is us, the people. Hope is when people gather to make change. So this is the idea that we need a push from below, from movement, in order to achieve a just ecological transition. So this is the topic that I study in my daily work, climate justice movements such as Friday for Future, Extinction Rebellion, and so on and so forth. So I think that we could say that there are 4 current trends. The first is that the tactics of protests are radicalized. I think that we are all witnessing radical forms of civil disobedience in museums against art objects or road blockades. So this is the first fact. A second fact is that climate strikes and civil disobedience are not really scaling up in many countries, such as Italy. So we have a crisis of participation. And third, this is very important, the engagement of trade unions and workers is quite limited. So climate justice movement tend to be composed by middle class, urban professional or students. And third, we have a growing repression from different governments against climate movement, meaning that in many cases they do not judge them as political actors, but as criminal actors. So here some ideas that we can also use in our daily life to relaunch climate activism. First, the convergence among climate movements and with other kind of social struggles, such as workers, feminism, anti-racism, cycling activism. 2 weeks ago, for instance, we organized in Milan the first World Congress for Climate Justice, which was a big process of convergence. 66 movements from the world came to Milan to discuss a common platform, a common strategy. So this is an opportunity. Second, I think that we need to experiment other tactics of protest, other disruptive tactics of protest. And we need to maintain a perseverance in using these tactics. So this also is demonstrated by some sociological studies, that it's not so useful to have sporadic protests, and we need perseverance. So, for instance, adopt a tactic and use it for weeks. In the Netherlands, for instance, they blocked a highway for, I think, 20 days in order to put pressure on the government. And third, we need art to sensitize people and to mobilize people, because we know that climate science is not enough, and we need the theater, literature, music, cinema to mobilize people. And also we need to shift the communication and focus this communication on more positive stories, because we need to maintain hope and a sense of agency. Sense of agency in the sense that people should feel that we still have time to change things, and that we can together find different ways of mobilizing and different ways of changing things. So it's important that we abandon these doomist, these very catastrophic narratives because they produce apathy and resignation. So we need to tell people that, yeah, the situation is serious, but we still have time, and it's possible to change things. History has demonstrated that movement from below and were successful in many cases. If you think about civil rights movement in the USA, for instance, or India's liberation, and so on and so forth. And this is it. This I put some data sources if you want to have a look. And this is my email, matteo.spini1 at gmail.com. And that's it. Thank you very much. If you have questions or suggestions.
So, thank you very much. Questions?
I will ask a question before I have to thank you, Matteo. I can ask in English the question. Okay.
Yeah.
I liked your strategies for scaling out or reactivating activism. Are there examples from history where this convergence of one cause with another, so climate justice with women's rights, with workers' rights, has successfully scaled out? Because my concern is when you start to merge with other causes, the agenda becomes confused and there's lack of action. Are there historical case studies where, I don't know, there was a higher set of values? I'm thinking of religious movements almost, where different causes came together under a single umbrella and were able to coordinate towards the larger goal.
I would say, if you remember the so-called no global movement, we used to call it like this in Italy, or in other countries, global justice movements, and the end of the 90s, early 21st century. That global movement was a convergence of different souls. There were some socialist groups, Catholic groups, anarchists, and so on and so forth. It was an impressive convergence of different ideologies, religious position, and forms of protest. But yeah, we couldn't say it was entirely successful because it didn't reach its goals. But yet it was able to produce very large mobilizations. In Italy, the movement ended in 2001 because of the state repression in Genoa. So I wouldn't say it failed because this convergence was too hard to combine, but it ended because of repression, for instance. And other historical cases, I don't know, we could...
But no global was huge.
Yeah, it was huge. It was huge.
I never heard of it. And
Seattle.
Il 2001 a Genova, non so se si
Oh, the people of Seattle, also in 1999, for instance.
Si chiama No Global.
No Global.
No global. Like my father was in no global movement, for example. No. And it was...
And
the point of anti-globalism.
Yeah.
I also anti-nuclear, because it was like the moment of nuclear power, and it was against building up the nuclear industry.
I don't into that example.
Yeah. And some of the issues by that anti-global or no global movement are the same that we are discussing now, for instance. So the pervasive influence of powerful lobbies on governments, for instance, or the negative influence of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, for instance, or global inequality, the North and the South. some issues are still discussed today, and but yeah, it's an interesting example of convergence, for instance.
And it was international.
Yeah,
With a big presence in Italy.
yeah.
I have a question about art because I'm historical art and critic. So I know that there is a wonderful example about eco-activism in contemporary art. This is, for example, a wonderful project of Salvatore Saldago, a famous photographer who, on their own money, just to recreate the forest in South America when it was something like desert thanks to industries that was before and so on and so on. I have a question. What is your favorite artist in contemporary art that makes some eco projects like Salvatore Saldago or something like this? And the second question, you just talked to us about different strategies in art that can be successful. For example, what for the project, what for the idea, you can just you can just make, for example, with Chiara Ferragni now. So these two questions.
Okay. Actually, I'm not an expert of the so-called artivism. So I'm not an expert on how to use art for social.
It exists and it's beginning to be trendy a little bit. All these eco, green, standard, and so on. So.
No, but yeah, Salgado is somehow a good example. I was also in exhibition Amazonia, and
Just now, just finished.
I think it's just over. Yeah, that is a good example. And in general, I could say that again in this World Congress for Climate Justice that we had 2 weeks ago. There was a discussion about this manifesto of radical imagination. So this is a manifesto somehow created by the Institute of Radical Imagination, and it's somehow a call to activists, to radical activists, to engage in the climate and ecological struggles. So I think that was an interesting moment. Creating a kind of a call, and it was followed by a series of workshops, for instance, in which they use Barbie, which is very pop. Barbie, for instance, in an ecological version of Barbie, so for instance, Greta Thunberg merged with Barbie. I mean, this is just an example of how to use pop and like popular topics for a kind of struggle. So people somehow, when you show Barbie, it resonates in the general public, and you can connect it with a totally different topic, which is the climate crisis. And so they built this kind of I don't know how to call them. Puppets, in which they merged pop art and ecological issues. And we had a demonstration with these puppets in the streets of Milan. So this was an example.
It's really a good idea because just the great changes begin with a new generation. Mm-hmm. You know, some example, for example, coffee in Japan and other examples. So they just create a new generation for biscuits for 10 years just to have an habit to drink coffee and so on. Mm-hmm. And perhaps I agree with you that it's a wonderful example. For example, just to create puppets with different activities. Like role models, mm-hmm. just to play with this kind of puppets, and so have this different, the other style of life, and then it will be something like a habit and a new philosophy. Because, for example, I dislike absolutely radicalism, and I think more of citizens dislike radicalism. Mm-hmm. And having something like a role model, Greta Thunberg, not a wonderful example, because. Well, it's not. it's nothing new that she is not very beautiful, not like Barbie, like typical Barbie, like stereotypic Barbie, like in this film, for example, that is now very, very popular. But it will be really a great choice, for example, to make something like a Pixar little movies with the other end of Barbie, not just visit the doctor there, just to being a really woman, and then just to being a really activist, just to plan something, and so on. It will be wonderful, really.
Yeah, and again, I mean, we have evidence that the scientific and very quantitative communication, it's important, but it's not enough. I mean, people need art to be influenced. They need emotions also, and also more positive emotions in order to engage into a change. So this is really a kind of shift from a pessimistic and too scientific, let's say, communication to a different kind of communication through art, through more positive messages, through like stories, emotions, and again, the sense of agency. You need to tell people that they can do something, that it's not that we are doomed to extinction. Okay?
Una domanda dal pubblico
Sì.
online.
Sì.
Te lo faccio in italiano. Perché,
Sì.
come ci possiamo comportare di fronte invece a tutte queste potenze governative che abbiamo che negano questa, cioè che sono negazionisti di questa cosa, come noi piccoli esseri umani?
Yeah. I mean, climate denialism is still here. We have it in our government in Italy. And the Republican Party of the United States is also partly climate denialist. So it's still a problem. And I would say vote, first of all, vote, and do not vote them. Vote for other candidates, for other parties. And protest, I would say, second. So it doesn't mean that we all need to adopt civil disobedience. I know that it's a very radical form of protest. Some people do not like it, but find other ways to protest and to sensitize people. But yeah, in many cases, I mean, apart from the elite, in many cases, let's say that it doesn't work to attack, let's say, common people with the climate denialist ideas. It doesn't work. If you attack them and say, okay, you're ignorant, they will adopt a defensive approach. So I would say that our target should be on the people who are aware of the climate crisis, but they are not aware on, for instance, on how to change things, on which behaviors we need to adopt. And but yeah, I would say, first of all, vote, protest, and sensitize people, and
Speak with them.
Speak with them. Yes.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay.
Okay.
So facciamo un bel applauso a Matteo.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And you say goodbye to everyone. The next one is in 26th of November. It's Friday at Frogs Lab. Thank you very much for coming here. It's very early. There's a lot of food still, so if you want to do the second breakfast, you can do that. The third, the fourth, exactly. Thank you, Matteo and Spaces, for this amazing morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Come si spegne qua? Ah, eccolo, trovato.